As they used to say when we were kids growing up in the United States, what's good for the lightly populated Russian colony of Ukraine is good for us. As our oldest and most cherished ally, yoked tightly to the American people by the ancient bonds of friendship, shared culture, and barisma, Ukraine comes first. It has to come first. When caravans of undocumented Russians appear on the Ukrainian border, the United States doesn't sit idly by. The United States swoops in with deadly weapons to push these people back. We'll send missiles to Ukraine if we have to. In fact, we already have billions of dollars worth. But wait a second, you ask. Isn't undocumented immigration a good thing? Doesn't immigration increase diversity, the blessed source of all beauty, power, and strength? Well, sure. Most of the time it does, but not in Ukraine. Ukraine exists for the exclusive presence of Ukrainians. People who look or speak differently, people from other places with, say, different religions, are not allowed in Ukraine, period. That's Nancy Pelosi's position. Ukraine is the one place Nancy Pelosi very much wants to keep racially pure. She's willing to use lethal force to do that. Here's Joe Biden's deputy national security advisor explaining that when undocumented foreign nationals arrive in Ukraine, they'll be killed.
Why should Americans care about what's happening in Ukraine?
Because it goes to a very fundamental principle of all nations, which is that our borders should be inviolate, that our sovereignty should be respected.
On Tuesday, we did a segment about the nation of Ukraine. Now, Ukraine may be a perfectly nice place to visit, but you wouldn't think it would get a lot of attention from a superpower like this one. Ukraine's a pretty small country, really. It's in Eastern Europe. It's 5,000 miles from Washington. It's got a population about the size of the state of California. So hugely significant? Not really. And yet we never seem to stop talking about Ukraine. In the coming days, Russia may violate Ukraine's eastern border, and this, we are told, cannot stand. In Washington, the territorial integrity of the United States means precisely nothing. Walls are racist. We're a nation of immigrants. But the territorial integrity of Ukraine, that is something we must fight for. This is the entire choir. You just saw representatives from every faction in Washington, from Adam Schiff to Dan Crenshaw, not as different as they seem, and all the dummies in between. And all of them are promoting war against Russia on behalf of our new and deeply beloved ally, the government of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is our most dangerous enemy, they scream. We can't let him hurt Ukraine. So it turns out Russiagate was actually more effective even than we'd realized. The Steele dossier has been debunked, but in Washington, the theme remains in force. Russia, 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 Russia is bad. But unfortunately for them, the Russians are just too literal for this. When they invade a country, they just go ahead and call it an invasion. But you still have to wonder, invasion or not, why is any of this a profound concern of ours? Why would you even consider risking American lives or sending billions of dollars to stop it? There are multiple borders wars underway around the world. There are multiple. Just on the continent of Africa right now, there always have been. Many are dying in those wars. And yet Kamala Harris is not agitating for American troops to Congo. How come? We can only speculate about that. Because as you know, if you watch the media, we're agents of Putin too.
Fox's chief propagandist, Tucker Carlson, saying that the U.S. should be siding with Russia over Ukraine. What, you may say?
Members of Congress are actually getting phone calls encouraging them to side with Russia because they're watching right-wing media and people like Tucker Carlson.
It is striking how neatly Kremlin propaganda seems to dovetail with Carlson's talking points.
When Tucker Carlson delivers this message, it's dangerous.
Now, Tucker seems to have some sort of larger pattern here with tyrants who lean to the right.
But why is he so committed, and why is Fox News, on his behalf, so committed to tearing down American embrace and support and alignment with the world's democracies?
Tucker is utterly shameless. If he had any capacity to feel any shame, he should be embarrassed by what he just said, because he is basically repeating rank Russian propaganda.
But let's be clear about what the terms are. In the United States, and this does not apply to Ukraine, where they have probably a more sane view of it, or maybe just more Russian influence view of it, but in the United States, if you raise any questions about the wisdom of siding in a war in Eastern Europe with one country over another, you are, by definition, an agent of the single greatest threat to democracy on this globe, Mr. Vladimir Putin himself. You're treasonous. Congressman Tom Malinowski of New Jersey is claiming that viewers of this show, Russian Robots to a Man, reached out to his office and did something horrifying, something that probably should be illegal. They said maybe we shouldn't go to war over Ukraine.
Can you just tell us about these phone calls that your office is getting?
Yeah, sure. It really started yesterday. I was in my district office in New Jersey, and phones were ringing, and my district director came to me and said, I just spent an hour on the phone with like 4 people telling me that they'd watched Tucker Carlson last night, and why are we going to be going to war for Ukraine? Russia's making reasonable proposals for peace, and we should just do what Russia wants.
The only way that Poland might be saved is with the help from its allies, Britain and France, but they are stalling. For several years now, Poland's allies have been pursuing a policy of appeasing Hitler. In 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain signed an agreement with the Germans, Italians and French, effectively allowing Hitler to tear Czechoslovakia to pieces.
Chamberlain and others dreaded the prospect of war. During the crisis over Czechoslovakia, Chamberlain made this radio broadcast.
How horrible, fantastic, incredible it is that we should be digging trenches and trying on gas masks here because of a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing.
Chamberlain wasn't alone in feeling that the affairs of Eastern Europe were none of Britain's business. For most people, the Empire was still the UK's #1 priority, and Britain was already overstretched defending that.
When Chamberlain was questioned about this, he responded, "However much we may sympathize with a small nation confronted by a big and powerful neighbour, we cannot in all circumstances undertake to involve the whole British Empire in war simply on her account. If we must fight, it has to be on a larger issue than that."
The British public doesn't really seem too fussed about it all either. Some newspapers rationalize Hitler's actions. Foreign Minister Anthony Eden will write in his memoirs that at the time of the crisis, he asked his taxi driver for his thoughts on it, who simply responded, "I suppose Jerry can do what he likes in his own backyard, can't he?"
I think the main question for John and Jane Q American is this worth it? Like, is war with Ukraine really worth American interests? Why does this matter to the everyday American? What are we going to get out of this? We have much bigger things to worry about right now than getting mired in another war over there. Is U.S. military involvement in Ukraine, for lack of a better way to put it, worth it?
So, Joshua, first of all, we are going to do everything we can to avoid that. That means providing assistance from far away from the battlefield, right? And if U.S. troops get injured somehow by or killed by Russians, even if it's a mistake, they will defend themselves. And we saw that in Syria. But we have ways of communicating with the Russians so that it doesn't escalate. In Syria, when our special operations forces were attacked by Russian contractors, they fought back and over 100 Russians died. So the Russian government should know that if anything happens to Americans, they will fight back and there will be a price to pay. So hopefully it will not come to that. But what is at stake here is, I'm not kidding, nothing less than the international order. If Russia gets its way in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin will turn around and he will threaten the Baltic states because they used to be part of the Soviet Union, and he thinks he should continue to have a sphere of influence there. He will threaten other countries, maybe even other NATO members like Poland. He said that he doesn't want NATO forces in Bulgaria and Romania, other NATO members. He's not going to stop until he has a sphere of influence. Well, sphere of influence means rolling back to pre-World War II system of international order, which was disorder. It was competitive. And that's why we set up the UN, again, as I said, with the charter that said, you may not like the borders where they are, but you cannot change them using military force. You have to negotiate any changes.